cities that led to higher infection and mortality rates. It examines the impact of the pandemic and explores the measures adopted to contain the spread of the virus and to enable better informed decision making and policy formulation that can trigger long-term structural changes in building a more resilient urban future. The presentation.
My apologies, I accidentally played the wrong presentation. I will now play Xiao Chenyi's presentation.
Hello, researchers and scholars. I'm graduate student Xiao Tianyi from Tianjin University Architecture School. I'm a member of Spatial Humanities and Place Computation Lab, guided by Dr. He Jie. The topic of today's report is Social Distance Model-Based Risk Assessment of Spatial Configuration on COVID-19 Transformation. I will explain it from 5 parts: background, literature review, modeling methodology, computer simulation, and conclusions. First of all, COVID-19 is responsible for a global pandemic. Previous study demonstrated the effectiveness of social distancing. When social contact decreased by 70%, the infection rate decreased from 66% to 1%. From top to down, many countries have implemented population-level physical distancing measures and movement restrictions. From down to top, people stay at home, wear masks, change their travel mode. However, from the perspective of everyday travel, there is a lack of data and performance evaluation for various travel strategies. Based on the investigation of social distancing, this study wants to handle 2 problems. The first is how to simulate social distancing motion, and the second is what special factors influence social distancing. We developed a systematic simulation-based approach called social distance model. This approach combines a pedestrian dynamic model with a modified SEI model. The investigation on the mechanism of how COVID-19 transmits among people is a complex issue that covers different research areas. Existing works can be categorized into 2 main aspects: epidemiology and pedestrian dynamics. A large number of researchers have carried out extensive research in 2 fields. In the field of epidemiology, there are SIR, SERS, and other transmission dynamic models. The weakness of these studies are that the population remains constant, but the volume of pedestrians in real life is variable. Second, the previous study fails to observe actual infection because not consider human interactions in crowd. In pedestrian simulation, there are social force model, agent-based model, and cellular automata. However, few attention have been paid to the social distancing dynamic. Further, most studies not consider self-organization phenomena in pedestrian dynamic, which may lead to potential transmission to be ignored. Also, there are few cases that combine 2 fields mentioned above. In pedestrian dynamic, the social force model has the advantage of evaluating the complete individual tragedies. The specific performance is qualitative description of the self-organization phenomenon, the simulation of continuous space, and the introduction of psychological and social interaction. This study chooses the social force model as the basic to study the social distance dynamic. The conception of social force was introduced to keep reasonable distance among people. The social force model is developed by Herbin and Mona in 1995, where the pedestrians were driven by three forces, namely desired force, interaction force between pedestrians, and interaction force between pedestrian and walls. Desired force can drive pedestrian to destination with a certain desired speed. Pedestrian force can be divided into three forces, namely repulsive interaction force, body force, and sliding friction force. The body force and sliding friction are triggered only when people touch each other. Interaction between the pedestrian and the walls are similar. So I won't go into details here. Finally, this is the simulation result of the social force model for different scenarios. Although the social force model is proved to be an effective model to reflect the dynamic and anisotropic characteristics of pedestrians, it cannot effectively simulate the trip under social distancing. Therefore, we need to modify the original equation to reduce the physical contact between pedestrians. Here is the framework of social distance model, which is composed of three parts: dynamic, navigation, and influential factors. The influential factors include velocity, visual field, prevention awareness, and social distance. We use Dijkstra algorithm in pathfinding, which guarantee pedestrians can deal with complex environment such as turning, dead corner, and so on. Dynamic is the core of social distance model, mainly including the deceleration and avoidance mechanism added to the desired force, and the drawback mechanism added to the interaction force. Let's take it apart. When the distance between pedestrian I and J is less than the average of their desired social distance, Dij, pedestrians tend to slow down with the desired speed of 0. When the distance is greater than Dij, it is expressed as a potential monotonically increasing with distance. That is to say, the farther the distance between pedestrian I and G, the greater his desired force is. Secondly, the social distance repulsive force is added to the force between pedestrians. When the distance between the two pedestrians is less than Dij, the pedestrians behind get a repulsive force, and the direction is a vector from J to I. Finally, we use the number of contaminants of aerosols that a pedestrian contact in a breathing cell with adjacent coefficient gamma. Then the possibility for infection P is given by a Poisson distribution. This is the pattern diagram. Contacts between the infections and susceptible pedestrians were collected by social distancing pedestrian dynamic and then utilized to estimate the proportion of newly infected numbers in different spatial configurations. To verify the utility of the social distance model under the epidemic situation, we designed 3 pedestrian activity scenarios as follows. To model the room used in practice, we selected room of a size 15 meters plus 15 meters with a 1.5 meter wide exit, similar to those in the standard library reading rooms. Taking the typical underground passage as a reference, we select a 6 meter wide and 30 meter long corridor for simulation. Pedestrian vending queues are necessary crowd management measures at airport security, ticket, and security controls of the theme park attraction. So we put queues in a 7.5 meter wide and 12 meter long rectangular area with a 3 meter long waiting buffer. The mean number of new infections and average contact number are 2 essential measures to assess performance of different space management. We design 2 comparative layouts for every scenarios. For closed room, we alter the exit width to 3 meter wide and the number of exits to 2 1.5 meter wide. For vending queue, we design horizontal queue and queue with sideward separations. For corridor, we put a series of columns in the middle and railings in the middle. At the beginning, the probability of infection in the population is 2%, which will make the surrounding become a high-risk area. By defining the infection function, the number of new infection pedestrian is calculated. Here shows the simulation result of different social distance rate, and the new infection pedestrian is shown in the red. This is the closed room. This is the vending queue. And the corridor. Simulation shows that proper plan layout plays a vital role in the spread of COVID-19 during social distancing. For closed room, both strategies of increasing the number and width of the exits can effectively reduce infection. For corridor, the study found that social distancing used by oppositely moving pedestrians may cause deadlock and block the area, leading to a large-scale infection transmission. Put railings in the middle of the corner can avoid potential irregular motion, which effectively reduce contact number and suppressing the disease spread. For vending queue, the simulation shows that a vending queue with fewer corners reduces the contact and thus lower the infection spread. Setting separations between adjacent aisles is another effective configuration. This is the reference, and this is the whole speech. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you very much for that quite interesting simulation of pedestrian movement. I'm wondering if we have any questions from the audience. I see some people there. Is there anything that you want to ask? Nothing is coming up. You could use the chat or the Q&A button. I will have a question in this case. I'm curious to know whether there is a difference between, in the simulation, pedestrians moving in the same direction and those moving in opposing directions. In other words, perhaps mixing the traffic in terms of the aerosol dispersal. which of course raises or lowers the potential contamination. Do you have a response to that, or are you there, in fact?
Yes, I'm here. So you means the opposite pedestrian may contact with each other when they walking.
Yes, I just mean aerosols dispersing depending on the direction of the movement.
No. Actually, I do the judgment of the transmission of the virus is the I think the hypothesis is that I think the virus is a circle. It's a circle around the pedestrian, the infected pedestrian. So it's all the same. It's same with the 360 degree of the infected pedestrian. So it's not related to the direction of the walking of the pedestrian.
All right, but as we have seen in many environments, including the one I'm in at the moment, there is always an effort to separate the movement directions in pedestrian spaces. So what is the
yes.
What is the purpose of that then?
Because in a corridor, if the pedestrian is all in the same direction, then the transmission will only occur in the behind between the pedestrian in front and the pedestrian in later. But in the double direction of the pedestrian, then the transmission may occur in a more various way. For example, when the people walk right and face the people walk left, they may contact. And if the number of the people is very it is a lot, then the context may cause a very congestion and deadlock of the corridor. And the deadlock may increase the infectious transmission. So that's the reason why I need to simulate the opposite direction. If there is only one direction, then the simulation of the transmission is very simple, and it's not like the real world scenarios, because in the real world, people always walk into the corridor in both sides. So I need to simulate the both sides.
Right, very good answer. Very good answer on that. And I have a ton of other questions, but I don't have, we don't have time to pursue it further unless there is any other quick question coming from our audience, which I'm not seeing now. So thank you very much for that most interesting paper, which I do hope you publish if you haven't already published it.
Yes, I will publish in the future. It's under review now. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Good luck with that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's move to the second presentation here. And I think it is Antara Tandon who is going to make that presentation from UN Habitat in India. The title of the talk is Spatial Patterns and Dynamics in the Face of the Pandemic Towards Better Design, Density, and Functionality of Human Settlements. So, can play the video.
A section of UN Habitat.
I'm sorry, are you guys able to view the presentation?
Can't see the presentation yet.
Okay, okay.
On spatial patterns and dynamics in the face of the pandemic towards better functionality, design, and density of human settlements. This paper is presented by the Planning, Finance and Economy section of UN Habitat. The paper is part of a larger series of UN Habitat under the Cities and Pandemics report. My name is Antra Tandon from Delhi, India. I'm one of the co-authors of the paper. The other co-authors include Ban Edilby, Charlotte Mon, and Helen Elizabeth Yu. The paper is the first published by UN Habitat covering the future state of cities in a world with pandemics. It is part of a series that aims to build evidence, which presents the pre-existing conditions in cities that led to higher infection and mortality rates. It examines the impact of the pandemic and explores the measures adopted to contain the spread of the virus and to enable better informed decision-making and policy formulation that can trigger long-term structural changes in building a more resilient urban future. The presentation goes through the different scales of settlements from the regional and territorial scale to the city, neighborhood, and building scales. Each scale deals with different sectors or topics under planning and comes up with recommendations for urban practitioners and policymakers. The aim of the paper is to examine the relationship between COVID-19 and the urban form and function and reflect on the possibilities for reimagining the city and its connection to health at multiple territorial scales. It brings forth current evidence and its potential influence on decisions. It revisits the present urban and territorial forms in the face of the pandemic in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, and equitability. It also redefines the tools available to sustainably support cities in their transition towards higher levels of health resilience. The paper emphasizes the importance for built environment practitioners to include health as a key dimension of urban living to decrease the spread and burden of communicable diseases in the future. The different scales that the paper talks about are the territorial and regional scale, city scale, neighborhood scale, and finally the building scale. Under each scale, the existing preconditions are examined along with the immediate measures undertaken to control the virus as well as long-term actions that cities plan to take in wake of future pandemics. Under each theme, priority actions and lessons are listed for urban morphology. The topics covered under each of the systems are listed here, which we will discuss in the coming slides. Territorial systems and regional patterns. The first topic under this is climate change and environmental systems is also the most pressing challenge that the world currently faces. The deterioration of vegetation cover has led to habitat loss and intermingling of animal and human environments, contributing to an increase in zoonotic diseases in the past few decades and also leading to more frequent epidemics and pandemics in the world. Rapid unsustainable urbanization, biodiversity loss, and increased human-wildlife contact accelerates the spread of viruses and infections. To overcome these challenges, adopting environmental protection measures that limit land use conversion, establish protected areas that limit ecosystem deterioration and deforestation, biodiversity loss, and air pollution will be critical. Restoration of habitats and reintegration of natural landscapes within the built environments of the city will also help build resilience. Air quality emerges as a key precondition for contagion and mortality rates in cities. Limiting atmospheric and environmental pollution can build resilience into urban and territorial planning. To combat the deteriorating air quality, plan for decreasing air pollution through compact and polycentric urban forms can decrease reliance on motorized transport, and addressing sources of air pollution at the regional level will be critical. Working from home, reduced traffic and greenhouse gas emissions, and minimized wasteful consumption. Cities should explore and encourage this transition to clean energy alternatives in the longer run. The initial spread of COVID-19 matched with global connectedness and with the speed at which cities were able to control their borders. The COVID-19 pandemic, which first emerged in Wuhan, soon spread to countries in Europe connected through its trade networks. Cities are parts of larger networks dependent on resources from other cities or rural areas. By strengthening the regional and urban-rural linkages, by expanding regional infrastructure and functions can make cities more robust. Smaller cities have seen the opportunity to attract remote workers, and so by investing in basic services and employment opportunities in smaller cities will reduce dependence and alleviate the burden on larger cities to accommodate more people and provide more job opportunities. Agriculture and food systems also faced challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown measures that led to disruptions in the regional and cities' food systems, including processing, movement, and supply. By embracing localized means of production will shorten supply chains. Integrating logistics into urban transport plans and prioritizing resilient solutions to the delivery of food will help bridge this gap. At the city scale, equitable access to basic services was a critical precondition. Spatial inequalities manifest in unequal distribution and access to basic services and infrastructure. Cities with equitable distribution and accessible services showed that they were less vulnerable. Spatially equitable and well-planned cities are more resilient to health crises. Thus, by prioritizing investments to ensure equal access to basic services and social infrastructure targeting impoverished neighborhoods can build resilience of cities. Urban form and function also played a key role in the spread and containment of the virus. Larger cities have greater connectedness, making them more susceptible at initial stages. Density, however, was not a deciding factor in increased infection. It actually enabled better emergency response and is linked to better control of the virus. Concentration of functions and users who commute are a better predictor of the contagion. Thus, advocating and planning for well-designed urban density with supporting infrastructure is key to building resilience, and also considering multicentric patterns and well-distributed functions to avoid imbalanced development will be important for cities. Areas that have a harder time responding to shocks due to their morphology or availability of services are termed as weak spots in this paper. These include informal settlements that are often overcrowded, severely impacting capacity of basic services, or suburban areas that lack infrastructure to support mixed-use public transport and non-motorized transport. Cities must recognize these weak spots and address the conditions. Cities must also plan for growth while reducing spatial inequality of fragmented city structures. Mobility was reduced by lockdowns and fear of contagion across cities, and patterns changed dramatically. However, mobility for essential workers remained crucial in the functioning of cities even during the pandemic. Changes in mobility options have an impact on equitable access to opportunities and services and on the quality of the urban environment. Public transport usage plummeted due to fear of contagion. However, evidence does not link the use of public transport to the spread of the virus. Equitable access to safe and affordable public transport can reduce effects of inequalities and segregation. Cities should ensure public transport remains safe, reliable, affordable, and efficient for residents, while also being economically feasible for city to operate. Non-motorized transport gained popularity during the pandemic, both by public regulations and individual responses. Growing number of cities are expanding their non-motorized transportation networks and actually retaining them even while opening up. by promoting well-distributed, safe, non-motorized transportation, can help in the last-mile connectivity, increase access of residents, and improve urban health. A shift towards digital lifestyles, which included working from home, studying, shopping, and also socializing online, has reduced the demand for traditional downtowns and office business parks. Digital solutions and remote working have eased direct impacts of lockdowns and can pave the way for more equitable spatial organization of cities. However, they can also widen inequalities if not provided in a consistent manner. Repurposing of monofunctional areas such as downtowns in favor of city-specific priorities such as affordable housing is an opportunity. By reducing the digital divide and building citywide resilience, by investing in robust infrastructure and equitable access to telecommunication for all is a key recommendation. At the neighborhood scale, public spaces supported emergency response through the setup of hospitals, warehouses, and logistical facilities. They were also key for community and social resilience as well as personal well-being. A compact and mixed-use neighborhoods are beneficial for citywide resilience by containing the spread of the pandemic. They allow people to meet their daily needs within walking distance. Retrofitting neighborhoods for mixed use and dense living, which can accommodate more local commutes, will be key in building resilience for the future. At the building scale, poor housing quality and lack of access contributes to the spread of communicable diseases. Thus, preventing overcrowding by ensuring adequate and affordable housing and improved basic services, while also incorporating a form of outdoor space to improve physical and mental health, is a lesson for designers. Flexible buildings played a role in adaptive reuse that was valuable during COVID-19. Multi-purpose and flexible buildings should be identified in resilience plans, and reconsidering building design to accommodate changing health and workplace standards will be critical in the future. Finally, in conclusion, some of the key concluding thoughts include improving health and wellness of urban residents by providing access to healthy food, healthcare, clean air, water, and sanitation will support better response and reduce the impact of the disruptive measures taken during pandemics. COVID-19 has brought renewed attention to spatial inequalities and its negative effects on our collective resilience. Evidence-based decision-making will be required to ensure an inclusive and sustainable trajectory for cities. Evidence on the impact and effectiveness of COVID-19 continues to evolve and is extremely dependent on the political, cultural, and socio-economic context of each city. Finally, policy formulation and long-term structural changes necessitate multi-sectoral and multi-scalar plans and interventions and stakeholder commitment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Tandon, for that quite comprehensive overview of where we need to go in the coming years to be resilient enough to respond to future such crises as we are experiencing now. I will again invite any of our participants, or in fact co-panelists, if they would like to intervene now with the question for our panelist. While you're thinking about that, I would maybe have a comment that you might want to reply to. Are you there?
Yes, good afternoon from here.
Oh, okay. So
Abimbola is on the
yes,
speaking.
thank you. Okay, thank you for
Thank you.
that clear.
I want to appreciate Tandon for the brilliant presentations he has made. Now, my question goes thus, that when we look at the presentation from the regional planning point of view, and we look at the role that the cities are playing towards creating resilient settlement, the thrust of this presentation, will it be seen that role of cities as being a central place one, in which case the city resilience will now serve as a model for the surrounding areas, or will you see it from the point of view of placemaking? In other words, when the cities are resilient, the surrounding areas, are they going to look up onto city for the achievement to be embraced or to be adapted? That's my question.
Hi, unfortunately, I do not think the presenter is in the session today. Yeah, I cannot find her.
Okay, so it's a good question, but we don't have an answer, direct answer here. So I won't be able to ask my question either, which really had to do with governance. And maybe it's just a comment, perhaps much like the previous one that we just heard. We've wanted to do a lot of these things for a number of years now, and we haven't been terribly successful at it. So I'm wondering about the governance structures that's going to enable us to manage this very comprehensive agenda. But so that's just a rhetorical question. We don't have an answer for that. And so unless we, the participants, were to discuss it, but I think it's a bit unfair to the presenter to do that. So I'm going to then go to the third presentation, which I guess will be presented by Wu Shaoyi at Shanghai University. Digital City in response to COVID-19, a comparative study on health codes between Wuhan and Daegu, I guess, in South Korea. So perhaps we could have the presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Shaoyi Wu. The paper is about digital city in response to COVID-19, a comparative study on health code between Wuhan and Daegu. The paper is co-written by me and Professor Wang. Before my presentation, thank Professor Wang and ICCCASU for giving me this opportunity, and thanks my friends for helping me collect data and revise this paper. Now the presentation will begin. These are contents of this presentation, including introduction, methodology, results, conclusion, reference. First is the introduction. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 is an unprecedented global public health crisis. In China, a major outbreak occurred in Wuhan, while in South Korea, a major outbreak occurred in Daegu. As is known to all, lockdown is the best way to stop the spread of infectious disease, but it is not the best way for city management during a pandemic. In the process of promoting the resumption of work and production, a digital pandemic prevention means was born in China, which is health code. Health code is a QR code that tells you if you are infected. It is applied online and is generated from personal data. The QR code as an individual electronic certificate can be used in the whole city. In China, the emergence of health codes has effectively controlled the spread of the pandemic and facilitated population mobility, thus facilitating the resumption of work and economic recovery in the country. The health code is imitated by other countries. For example, Trace Together in Singapore, contact tracing in the United States, NHS in the United Kingdom, Current App in Germany, Stop COVID in France. The health codes of China and South Korea are the most similar among these. The health code in China and South Korea are jointly promoted by the government and enterprise. Both adopt mobile network connection to get information, and both mandatory to use. By now, the outbreak has eased in Wuhan, China, while the city of Daegu is still seeing new infections every day. Therefore, this paper will take Wuhan City and Daegu City as examples to discuss the difference in the use of health code between China and South Korea, so as to improve the digital solution of urban health under the pandemic situation and promote the recovery in the post-pandemic era. Methodology. Based on TOE framework, this paper makes a comparative analysis on the influencing factor of implementing health code in Wuhan and Daegu. TOE framework divides the factors affecting technology application into 3 categories: technology, organization, and environment. The TOE framework has good scalability in the selection of specific variables and is suitable to be used to study innovation adoption at the organizational level. Therefore, a TOE framework for health code is established in this paper. T refers to technology, which includes the development level of big data and technical personnel. O refers to organization, which includes the distribution of government attention to public health, the degree of public health information disclosure, and public response. E refers to environment, which includes the level of economic development, the current tax pressure, pandemic prevention system. Results. Technology. South Korea's big data capability is ahead of China's, and the proportion of talents to the total population of South Korea is actually larger than that of China. Therefore, in terms of health code technology, Daegu City has an advantage over Wuhan City. For attention of all organizations, for attention of governments to public health, Wuhan and Daegu are equal. Both Wuhan and Daegu have issued pandemic prevention policies in time. China has developed the health code at the fastest pace, while South Korea has quickly learned from this and developed the Korean health code to trace infection and promote mobility in the post-pandemic era. For public health information disclosure, South Korea hosts press conference twice a day and discloses all information about COVID-19 to the public. The South Korean pandemic information is completely transparent. The date and data of new infections, as well as the total number of infections, can be inquired on the website. In China, the National Health Commission makes public the number of infected people and their travel record every day. Wuhan and Daegu are equal in the degree of public health information disclosure. For public response, many South Koreans have taken the government's warning seriously, but some organizations does not comply with government regulation in Daegu. They continue to gather during the pandemic, ignoring government directives, which has brought some trouble to public governance. So the Wuhan people respond better than the Daegu people. E. Environment. For economic, both China and South Korea are economically developed countries in Asia. Both countries is sufficient to support the R&D investment and management expenditure of health codes. For current task pressure, Wuhan and Daegu are both in a stage of a continuous increase in the number of infected people. Both governments are under intense pressure as the country focuses on where the outbreak are concentrated. In terms of prevention policy, the Wuhan government is more conservative, favoring a longer lockdown. The Daegu government prefers not to lock down. In the initial use of health code, Wuhan prefers the strict city lockdown system, while Daegu chose not to lock down. The lockdown lasted for a while after the health code was introduced in Wuhan, during which Wuhan residents could only travel within the city and are not allowed to go outside the city. In Daegu, traffic is still as usual, and merchants would remain open during the outbreak. There is no need for a health code when people travel across provinces and cities. Health code was only mandatory to use in crowded places, like restaurants and bars. Conclusion. The technical conditions of South Korea are better than that of China, while the response degree of Wuhan people and the strictness of Wuhan lockdown policy are greater than that of Daegu. In terms of pandemic prevention and control, the use of health code in China is more advantageous. Health code is easier to play a role in countries such as China, where the government is stricter and the people have a higher degree of cooperation with government. In countries where individual privacy rights are more emphasized, health codes are less effective because there couldn't be overall coordinated control. The effective use of health code not only need the support of highly advanced and new technology, but also need orderly management. These two conditions are indispensable. The last part is the reference. Most of the paper from the reference is about health code, city management, and COVID-19. And most of them are from 2020. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Wu, for that comparison of the use of QR codes in Wuhan and Daegu in the context of a different social and governance system, which is highly relevant to the way things are being managed in various contexts around the world. I'm wondering if anyone in our audience here would like to ask a question. If you are there, Ms. Wu, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
You are there. Yes, we can hear you. So I see a question is going to come from Mr. Omolabi. Do you want to speak?
I would like to speak, please. Prof?
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. The first question I want to ask has to do with practical application of this concept of health code in terms of physical urban management. Because when I read the abstract, it's like the approach enables citizens' health status to be identified. Without making any comparative analysis now, how has this approach helped in physical, how does it transform or has impacted on urban management in Wuhan city? That is question number one. The second question is in the context of localization, in which case knowledge is global, application is local. I want the presenter to help to explain how cities in developing countries what you can benefit from this concept or this presentation of this model. I want her to explain to us what cities in developing countries can gain or can learn from this research, the presentation that has been made in terms of application. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I think what we can learn from this research is that developing can learn from what the developing country can learn from this research is that the management is important in some crises, not only the COVID-19 but also some like typhoon or something. So once there is some crisis, the government need to put out some rules, some regulations to help others, to help everyone in the city to get together, and then they can do better without they can figure out the problem better. That's my answer.
All right. Okay, are there any other questions coming? Okay, well, I actually have a question which is a bit outside of what you have presented, but it's worth at least thinking about, because
Okay.
in many contexts, we are now concerned with the mental health effects of lockdown.
Yeah, right.
Well, we know that they're very effective for stopping contagion, and especially restricting contagion to very controlled areas. But the mental health effects are beginning to take a very prominent place in our discussion. I wonder if you have any comments on that, because you have two cases where clearly there was a very different approach in terms of confinement of the population. Do you have any comments about that?
Mental health is very important, and it is such a big problem in COVID-19 because in some countries there are some kind of lockdown policy. But mental health and physical health, they are so important that we cannot neglect one of them. So firstly, I think in the COVID-19, maybe the body health is more important at the first place. So maybe we should concentrate on our health first, and then we can use some app or something to help improve our mental health. Yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
Okay, so increasing reliance, although we're already very reliant on our electronic media as we're experiencing today. So you think an answer can be found by exploiting the virtual world that we are already using very extensively?
Sometimes the mental health comes from lonely, I think. And there some app that can help us communicate better with others. And from my experience, actually, the lockdown gives me it gives me more time to spend with my family. If there is not this kind of thing, I may go to school early, and somehow it gives me some more time with my family from my experience. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, yes, thank you for that.
Thank
Are there
you.
any other points coming from our participants? Perhaps not. By the way, I know that when lockdowns were lifted in China, this is certainly true in Beijing, people flooded into the shopping centers. I think the numbers in the shopping centers in Beijing were or have reached the numbers that existed in 2019 before lockdowns. So clearly people needed to be with other people at some point. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay.
Okay, so that was, if there's no other interventions coming from our audience, I would like to thank our three presenters for your very clear presentations and quite comprehensive ones. I certainly learned something from all of these. I hope our audience did as well. And thank you again, and carry on with the conference. I'm going to close this session now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.